Ukraine just slapped Russia in the face. But what is even worse is the way they did it, and the fact that Russia can do nothing about this. On March 31st, David Axe, a Forbes war correspondent, reported that Ukraine had just sent a bomb right through a Russian door. The door was for a bunker, and inside, a few of the top officials Ukraine had been desperately targeting to stunt the Russian war effort. The move sent shockwaves through the Kremlin, and despite a nonchalant reaction from President Vladimir Putin, Ukraine is becoming bolder and bolder. So, let's explore why this war has now taken a far different approach, and how this was even possible. This is how a MiG-29 dropped a bomb right through a door. Located in the Kherson region of Ukraine, Russia has been launching repeated strikes along the Dnipro River. In fact, Russia has been making decent gains in the area, slowly building on initial successes, whereby the country is gaining a bigger and bigger foothold in Kherson. But with Russia finding it hard to control the sky, it opened up the door for the unthinkable. Using the MiG-29, fitted with modern GBU-62 glide bombs, Ukraine did the unthinkable. The pilot sent one straight through the door of a Russian bunker, completely avoiding any defenses. Once inside, it was game over for the Russian commanders who had been directing things and guiding the troops in the region. Moreover, the move severely weakened the Russian offensive in the region, not to mention the skill it took to pull this off. The bunker in question, well, it used to be part of the Ukrainian anti-air defenses. Before the war had started, Ukraine was using the Russian S-300 surface-to-air missile system. It was a prime position, and with an attached bunker, it protected the Ukrainian soldiers during the initial special military operation. However, Ukraine lost access to this bunker during its initial retreats, and now the Russians, having captured it, chose to transform the asset into a command post of sorts. But this didn't last long. Thanks to incredible precision and skill, a Ukrainian pilot flying nothing but a Soviet-era MiG-29 managed to pierce the sky and launch a glide bomb. This bomb would land smack bam in the middle of the bunker, destroying all within its path. But how is this even possible, given the fact that Russia is better equipped for aerial warfare? When the war in Ukraine initially started, the world believed that Russia would quickly assert dominance over the sky. Initially, these attempts worked, but as the West entered the war, things changed. Despite having more modern aircraft, the use of the United States Patriot missile and anti-air batteries quickly knocked down a host of Russian Air Force assets. Russia quickly found out that controlling the skies over Ukraine was not as easy as initially planned. The introduction of the US HIMARS, which already took down 4 Russian helicopters just a few weeks earlier, is posing a massive risk for the Kremlin. But Russia has a big air force, doesn't it? Well, in comparison with the United States, the Russian Air Force is underwhelming. The US has about 14,000 aerial assets they can call on. Meanwhile, Russia only has about 4,200. This is still enough to create overwhelming force, and even with a combat readiness of 60%, Russia can still send about 3,000 aircraft into the air. But there are a few problems. First of all, Russia is struggling with advanced guided munitions. Many of its weaponry is old and requires a lot of risks being taken by pilots to hit targets. Moreover, the Ukrainian defensive efforts are also stern and don't pose any weakness. Russia could, in theory, choose to overwhelm these defenses, but in the process, it will become a massacre for the Air Force. Yes, Russia will ultimately wipe out Ukrainian defenses, but at what cost? If this was World War II, it didn't matter, and Russia would continue sending pilot after pilot to meet their maker just to further the Russian advances. Nowadays, the media is having a field day with some of these moments. Could you imagine a news headline should Russia lose 500 aerial assets? Not only does it make Russia look weaker to the rest of the world, but it feeds the narrative that Ukraine is fighting for its own survival. This will further enhance the support from the West, who now believes that Kyiv actually stands a chance to effectively win this war. Anyone familiar with war will know that this is not true. But in the modern geopolitical world, everything is about creating a favorable narrative that makes one nation look strong while the other looks weak. Knowing this, the Kremlin has refrained from fully deploying its air force. Since the battle lines are now drawn inside Ukraine, Russia doesn't have enough air defenses stationed in these war zones. In fact, moving the S-300 and S-400 systems into Ukraine will leave them vulnerable to other strikes, and Ukraine knows this. So, while Kyiv cannot take the risk of flying over Russian airspace, troops stationed in Ukraine are unprotected from the skies, and this is where things become a little more complicated for the Russian forces. To simplify this situation, Russia has been pushing forward into Ukraine without offering enough aerial protection for its units. This is exactly why an old-school MiG-29 could drop a glide bomb directly on Russian forces who had been hiding inside a bunker. This is what one Ukrainian military blogger had posted about the attack. The Russian offense in the region is now leaderless. The Russian regiments and brigades responsible for attacks on islands in the wide Dnipro River. Given the fact that the MiG-29 is a fourth-generation air superiority fighter that cannot compete with modern S-400 defense systems, it is quite interesting to see exactly what had made this even possible. The MiG-29 is one of the older aircraft in the Russian military. It was first introduced during the mid-1970s. With the introduction of the US-made F-16, Russia needed something that could compare with this aerial dominance, and the MiG-29 was born. Thanks to the speed and maneuverability of the F-16, the Russian goal was to be even more powerful and to ensure that this brand new MiG could rule over the skies of the Cold War. Russia succeeded. Once the MiG-29 was completed, it could fly at a speed of more than 1,500 miles per hour, while traveling a distance of around 1,800 miles. With the Cold War hotspots around Germany, this brand new Soviet aircraft was faster and slightly better than the coveted F-16, which made it a clear threat to the United States. Moreover, the aircraft needed ordnance, and it needed to carry a lot of this to be on par with the US aircraft. The Russians managed to do this by putting 7 external hardpoints on the MiG-29. With so many attack capabilities, the MiG became an instant threat, and its versatility meant that it could carry a vast array of different weaponry. To give you an idea of this versatility, the MiG-29 in its standard configuration was fitted with a 30mm gun that holds 150 rounds. Air Force technology further suggests that it can hold 2 R-27 medium-range missiles, which isn't effective in modern war, but packs a powerful punch in air-to-air combat situations. Adding to this is the R-60 and R-70 missiles, both usable for aerial dogfights. These missiles are great for aerial combat, but they cannot be used for longer-range strikes. Unguided ammunition like the S-5, S-8, and S-24 are ideal for dropping a lot of bombs in one place. Compared to other forms of Cold War munitions, this made the MiG-29 a serious threat to whomever was taking on the Soviet Union. To create further versatility, Russia also loaded it with about 6,000 pounds of conventional bombs. These are often used in a spray and pray approach. Essentially, it means that Russia drops the bombs on ground targets and then prays that it hits the target. Since they cannot be guided, landing a precise strike becomes virtually impossible. Had Ukraine conventionally used these MiG-29s, they wouldn't have been able to land these kinds of strikes, and this would have basically made such an attack impossible. But Ukraine is not reliant on Russia for any of its weapons, and now Kyiv has the support of the United States. Enter the GBU-62 glide bomb, a US-designed munition that can be precision-guided and will glide through the air to reach its precise location. But what is a glide bomb? The world first became aware of the infamous glide bomb back in 2024. The media reported that Russia managed to convert its old FAB bombs into something that would give the Kremlin more precision and allow them to easily strike targets without so much collateral damage. It was first reported by the BBC that these munitions had entered the war, which completely changed the concept of what we consider a war. So, what did the Russians do? Well, they made use of wing kits, costing between $20,000 and $30,000 each to modify the missile. But President Putin has thousands of these missiles, and despite its costs, the Kremlin continued pummeling Ukraine using them. Even though Ukraine has some of these missiles for itself, it is not always capable of using them at full capacity, and this made them weak to such strikes. Well, that was until the United States entered the fray. Its Joint Direct Attack Munition, or JDAM for short, became a very important part of the war. Much like the Russians had done, this new setup enabled the United States to also convert a few of its dumb bombs into something a little more sophisticated. But there is a striking difference between the Russian and American versions of these munitions. This main difference? Well, the United States has added the inertial guidance system, which works together with a GPS system. Instead of being human-guided, these missiles can be set with coordinates, and they will glide all the way to the target. Moreover, the quality of the U.S. bombs is much better. Known as the GBU-62, these bombs can carry a massive payload that ranges from 500 to 2,000 pounds. They have a range of 46 miles and can be launched from a height of 35,000 feet. But since these bombs are tailored to mostly work with U.S. military equipment, it is quite a stretch to have them mounted to a Soviet-style aircraft. Thanks to U.S. technology, it was made possible to fit the JDAM-ER, as it is also known to these Soviet-style aircraft. Ukraine chimed in saying that, even though it is an American-made munition, the bomb is uniquely Ukrainian. With the United States already launching a customization program under the Biden administration, many Ukrainian munitions had been converted to work with bombs that the Americans could send. Adding to the fact that these conversion kits are mostly used for small diameter or inexpensive bombs, it means that the United States could effectively create inexpensive glide bombs at a very cheap price tag. In fact, current estimates put the price for one of these bombs at around about $50,000 each. Keep in mind that accuracy is also of utmost importance for the U.S., which means that they want to make sure each of these munitions hits its target. Essentially, the bombs can be likened to the Russian Iskander ballistic missile. The only difference is that it costs about $3 million to construct a single one of these ballistic missiles. That becomes very expensive for the Russians. This might sound like a single event in the war, but it is far more complicated than that. Judging by the price and quality comparison, Ukraine can now launch similar strikes to Russia at a fraction of the cost. You can be sure that more and more of these JDAM munitions will now begin to feature in the war. With the new Dassault Mirage aircraft from France arriving in Ukraine, these strikes can become even more deadly. The Mirage is a 4.5 generation stealth fighter, and it has far more advanced capabilities than the MiG-29. Moreover, it is already configured in a way that makes it great for use with Western munitions. So, does this sway the war in favor of Kiev? It is easy to think that from all this, Ukraine now holds the advantage on the battlefield. But as with any war, nothing is as simple as it might seem. Russia still holds a massive advantage in the air. By disregarding other aerial assets, Russia still has close to 1,000 fighters it can call on. In comparison, Ukraine has merely close to 50, or perhaps 100. This means that Russia will be able to counteract this, but at a massive risk of some of its aircraft being shot down by US-made munitions. The second complication is the use of radar jamming technology. Both Russia and Ukraine can use such technology, and this will effectively ensure that only a fraction of guided munitions actually hit their target. It begs the question of whether this recent strike was maybe just luck, and they hit Russian setups before they had the opportunity to settle down and deploy radar jammers. The one thing you can be pretty sure about is that Ukraine will now use this new advantage and roll with it. In fact, there is absolutely nothing stopping Kiev from repeatedly pounding Russia with these GBU-62 bombs and supplementing them with the expendable drones they have been using thus far. While not fully reported in the media, Ukraine has already been using these bombs successfully in the Kursk region. After a powerful Russian counterattack, Kyiv began supplementing troops with a combination of these bombs and various drones. According to Ukrainian sources, they have already managed to weaken Russian positions, taking out at least 15 soldiers, with the possibility of this being closer to 40, considering the various targets. So, what does this mean for President Putin? As of this video, no official word has been given by the Kremlin, but you can be pretty sure that President Putin is fuming inside the Kremlin. The combination of recent sanctions and various military operations, which have slowly shifted the war in favor of Kyiv at certain points, Putin might be frustrated even further. Now, these JDOM attacks will ramp up, and as Ukraine receives more aircraft from countries willing to send them, they will have even more firepower. This will ramp up the pressure on Putin, especially in the regions of Kursk, where Ukraine is gaining a bit of its own negotiation leverage. Further aggravating the issue for the Kremlin is the fact that they cannot deploy air defenses. Since these defensive munitions are expensive, and Ukraine can just launch barrage upon barrage of drones, it will be quite costly to do so. With the ball now firmly in the court of Ukrainians, they might just persist and finally drive Russia out of the country. Now, this is just a single moment in time, and Ukraine has been pummeling Russia since negotiation talks have stagnated. The Kremlin might resort to something even deadlier, and we would encourage you to check this video next to see exactly how Russia managed to regain a foothold in Kursk.